Welcome to Bart and Tart Talk About Art.
Bling, 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 bling.
So, hello, Mr. Eric.
Hello, Simao.
And so today, as always, we have a very, very, very special picture. And this one is from a medieval book, and I believe it's called Hell from Hortus Deliciarum. I'm not sure if I said it correctly. I think the last two words are Latin, and I don't speak very well Latin. I'm sorry.
And you're even from a country where they speak a language that is derived from Latin, so that is quite shameful when you think about it, Simao.
I know. I will, flag myself afterwards.
As you should.
Flagellate myself afterwards.
Yeah. But anyway, yes, it's true. It's what we're looking at is an image. I mean, they call it Hell here. I'm not sure it has a title, but it is a drawing of Hell, which reminds me that in an earlier episode you said something about a picture I had chosen sort of being a good fit for a heavy metal album cover. And this one is kind of is too, and that certainly does bring up some thoughts for me about like how much my taste in fine arts may have been informed by being a teenaged heavy metal fan back in the day. But anyway, it is a drawing of Hell, and it is from a medieval manuscript, called Hortus Deliciarum.
And if you allow me to interrupt, it is a drawing from Hell, and it's a hell of a drawing.
It's a hell of a drawing. It sure is. You're on fire today, Simao.
Yes.
And I did it. Ooh, I wasn't even aware of that one. Sorry. I'm the worst at puns. I can do them unconsciously and recognize them after. But then I have to point them out because I'm so proud, and then I ruin everything. Anyway, so the Hortus Deliciarum was a manuscript put together by a nun in Alsace called Herod of Landsberg, apparently, sometime in the late 12th century, between 1167 and 1185. And then she put together this manuscript that was meant for the other nuns in the monastery, the Hohenberg Abbey. And it was meant to contain all the important information that nuns needed to do. So there was of course, theological material, but then also philosophical material and literary and musical material. And Herod of Landsberg has this this quite lovely foreword to the volume where she compares herself to a bee of God who hopes that her nuns will delight in the honey of this ancient knowledge, etc., etc. So it's kind of interesting in that it's a very old manuscript, and it's a manuscript that was sort of done by women, and sort of reflects of course, female, a women's culture in the nunnery, right? So I think nunnery is correct. I'm very not religious, so
sure. Why not? Why not?
Let's say it's a nunnery. All right. So anyway, it's a depiction of hell, and I think this is something I sort of stumbled on at one point. I don't have a ton of history with it personally. I sort of picked it because I thought it might be fun to talk about something that's very, very old. That's from a completely different pictorial tradition than the one you and I both lean toward. I think I'm possibly speak for both of us when I say that maybe fine arts from the first half of the 20th century is maybe what excites us the very most. And all the isms of that time. And of course, this is something completely different. And it's one of those things where, my father was talking about the other day how it was interesting that it took humanity so long to figure out the rules of perspective. Like that was a Renaissance thing, of course, that they started making images in sort of realistic linear perspective. But
Not quite, but yeah.
not quite. When did they start? Sorry.
So the thing with the Renaissance is that so Renaissance is non-Renaissance because it's the rebirth of the Greek and Roman tradition, right?
Right.
And they knew that the medieval people they were aware of that tradition, but they just abandoned it. They basically abandoned it, and then there is a rebirth.
Right.
In part, as far as I remember, because they discovered the Pompeii and Herculano, the cities that were covered by the volcano ashes.
Definitely. Yeah.
As far as I remember, I might be incorrect. It's from that time.
Yes.
But anyway, just the interests started changing, and that's why they started reusing again, perspective and all of that, and then it seems like they were evolving because they were picking up again on what they stopped using. So that's there seems to be an evolution, but actually, the Greeks, if you look at the paintings from Pompeii and all of that, they used perspective already. So
they didn't use linear perspective though, did they? With vanishing points and so on.
I'm not completely sure on that. Sure on that. But for example, if usually we think of the Greek art as more realistic than medieval art, right?
To be sure.
We think of like the sculptures and all of that. This kind of artwork that we're looking at right now, it was made by nuns.
Yeah.
It was made by people that are from the church, right?
Right.
The church is the last survivor, the last institution that survived from the Roman Empire. Right? Actually, the Catholic Church is called Roman Catholic Church, something like that, right?
Right.
Because it was the last political, spiritual institution that survived and so on. So they were the ones that kept, they had the sculptures from the Greeks. They really knew all of that. They had books from the great Greek philosophers and all of that. They had that knowledge, but they kept it. They were not interested on showing it and on disseminating the ideas of the Greeks and all of that.
No.
So in the medieval times they started using art in a more symbolical way.
Right.
Therefore, it becomes more flat and all of that, like the Egyptians did. Egyptians also had the kind of artwork that was more symbolical, right? So that's basically what happened.
Yeah, and it's that was kind of what I was getting at, that they were working with different aims in mind. Like, so the purpose of something like this is not to create sort of a realistic depiction of what hell might look like. The purpose of this is storytelling and it's communication, right? So,
but sorry to interrupt. Then again, what is a realistic depiction of hell?
Yeah, I did say of what hell might look like, right? But the purpose of this was not to put people in, sort of to feel people were in hell and looking at hell. The purpose is to communicate an idea about hell, right? And so, people talk about in medieval art, they talk about sort of a narrative perspective, if you will, where, the things that are important are bigger than the things that are not. And, when you flatten out perspective to be able to show more things at once. So if you do imagine, like, I don't know how they imagine hell exactly, but if you do imagine hell like an endless plane of fire and people being tortured all over, if you had that in actual perspective, the people being tortured in the foreground would sort of be, overlapping people in the background, and you wouldn't be able to see as much delicious torture as you can in this kind of side view, right?
True.
This schematic side view. So it is about communicating, and I think one thing also that that might play into this is how tied in this is. Like this is from the era of illuminated manuscripts, and this is part of an illuminated manuscript, to be sure, right? So it's sort of it is in a sense like both you and I are very passionate about comics, and it is some of that as well, right? It's the pictures helping tell the story that they want to tell, whereas later with printing press, etc., image making arguably becomes more divorced from words and from storytelling, and they become more concerned with visual input only, right? And so they serve different needs, the paintings of later periods. But with this one, clearly what we're being shown is an idea of what God is, and of course specifically how horrifying and terrible God is. And it's, as with a lot of medieval images, it's full of, there's a lot of stuff that's very clear on the surface here. Like it's very clear that a lot of people are suffering terribly in these sort of flames. It's very clear that there is some very specific sort of, torture scenes going on. At the same time, so for instance, in the bottom, there's this person being force-fed from this sort of huge horn, and there's people with fool's caps. It sounds like you're doing something in the background, Simao, something that sort of makes a bit of noise. I don't know.
I am taking some paper so that I can take notes. Go on, Eric.
Yeah, that is fine. So anyway, in the second to bottom tier, there's people with what looks like kind of fool's caps that are being burnt, and also there's like soldiers that are being burnt, which for me was interesting. Exactly what kind of soldiers are these? There's also at bottom left, there's someone being led by a demon into this hellish, place, possibly for an audience with Satan himself, which seems to be who we have at the bottom right there. At least that would be my best guess. And actually it does say Lucifer over his head, so I think I am correct on that one. And I'm not sure, I have a pretty strong sense that a lot of this stuff meant something very specific to the people who were looking at it at that time. Like they knew who these people with the fool's caps were and what they had done. They knew who these soldiers were. It was probably soldiers that people in Alsace at the time did not like, I would imagine. And they probably also had some sense of who this figure being guided into hell was and why he was being guided there. So there's all these sort of layers of meaning that are kind of, I think, probably mostly lost to us, or we're left sort of guessing to some extent what it might mean. And for me, that's a big part of the fun of an image like this. Sort of trying to figure out exactly what this meant to people back then. But then also being sort of liberated by the fact that you don't exactly know, so you can kind of make up your own stories, in terms of what might this all mean. And then there's, of course, just the sort of surface level joys of this kind of art. So I enjoy the liveliness of the drawing a lot. I enjoy the stylization of it. In this case, I really love the way that sort of these sort of caves with people burning in them form this sort of jagged frame around the image. I think that's a really fun visual aspect of this. And there's also just the sort of the memification of the meme-ready aspects of, the way that all the sufferers, as much as they're being tortured, they mostly have these sort of serene smiles on their lips. It may be torture, you may be sort of being suffocated by a snake, but still, you should keep up. A friendly appearance.
Also, you have to keep in mind that these were medieval people. Their life was not very different from hell anyway.
Their reaction was very different from what ours might have been if we were there. Probably, yes.
Yeah.
It is interesting, you know. I mean, this is completely different territory, and I'm just we may edit this out because it has nothing to do with anything. But I was just reading there's these protests in the UK now, and they're sort of like the text me when you get home hashtag, etc. You might have heard of this.
No, I haven't at all. Text me when you arrive home. I have no clue what that is. Text me when you get home.
Yeah, it's there was a woman who was killed by policemen on her way home in the UK, and that sparked.
Yeah, I heard. I might have heard a little bit, but go on.
And that sparked a lot of protests and a lot of talk about how it's not right that women can't feel safe walking home, which of course it absolutely is not. I'm not going to say anything controversial about that, but that just reminded me. I read this article about how actually statistically there has never been a safer time to go home from a night out on the town for a woman, just in terms of statistics in the West, like the statistical risk of something happening there, which I don't say to invalidate the protests and all the awareness around it, because of course as long as the risks are not absolutely zero, there is work to be done, and they're way too far from zero at this point, right? But it just reminded me of this sort of general, more general issue of how I think a lot of people feel like in the West that violence is getting worse and life is more dangerous. And statistically, there has never been less violence. Life has never been less dangerous. But we just hear so much about all the cases where something goes horribly wrong, and those cases, of course, don't stop existing because, I mean, from my view, I think a lot of this is simply human nature, right? But it does sort of, you know, and it does sort of, it does, like, looking at this and what you say does remind me of how that's another way in which it's really hard for us to know what this conveyed to people of its time, because their lives were just so incredibly more dangerous and difficult, and you know, their tolerance for violence and suffering must have been very different, just because life was so full of it in a lot of ways back then, right? So yeah, that could certainly inform some of the, you know, the serene looks on their faces. Not that this was thought of as just another day. You know, it's supposed to be scary and it's supposed to be extreme. But certainly, you know, I think when you're in a society where a ton of bad shit happens all the time, maybe you are more able to put on a sort of, at least sort of fairly unaffected face when bad shit happens. Maybe that leaves less room to show emotion, right? Because you kind of have to be tough, or you will crack, possibly. That was a very large detour. I'm not sure it's worth keeping in. But
yes, why not?
Why not? Whatever. We say all kinds of things.
Exactly.
I also kind of like old Lucifer down there. I think he looks kind of nice, you know, with his sort of his beard of flames and his, again, he has sort of a jolly, friendly smile on his face, you know. And the demons as well, they're smiling in a friendly way as they torture people.
That's true.
So, you know, overall,
so the moral of the story is it's good to be a demon. It's fun to be a demon.
I think so.
Be
definitely.
one.
Yeah. The demons definitely, you know, yeah. Join the dark side, to be sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No,
it's
probably
fair.
not.
The devil, he reminds me a little bit of like the Indian gods, you know, the depictions of Indian gods.
Sure, yeah, I can see that. Also, like sort of the heads protruding, which I think are like sort of hellhounds or something. He also has. It seems like he's sitting on those dog-like beings, and they sort of have their claws on human heads down there as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
also
very creative.
It's very creative. Also, I guess another way to look at the whole sort of the aspect of how used to violence we are. I guess the way that this is sort of just very explicitly gruesome, sort of the very explicit torture, etc., is something that you wouldn't have used in religious imagery like in the 1700s or the 1800s or something like that, you know, not this explicitly. And maybe that also speaks to how, you know, life was pretty shitty already. So if they wanted to convince people that hell was a bad place, they had to lay it on pretty thick, probably, right?
Yeah.
You know,
they really had to make a big effort.
Yes, to make it seem worse than Europe of the 12th century. You know, ravaged by plague and every other just conflict, constant conflict, and religious conflict and everything else. I think they had it all back then.
For sure. I think there are a few things you are talking about that thing of, you know, looking gruesome and showing violence and torture and all of that. Mm-hmm. And then again, we're talking about nuns that made this, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's interesting that we see this as a piece of like feminist art in a way. And yet it shows a side of women that we usually don't traditionally associate with like feminine, so to speak, art. You know, definitely. That is like violent stuff, going on, very nasty violence. So I find that interesting. I also find it interesting that despite being religious, something connected to religion and about, you know, punishing the sinners and all of that, there is a lot of nudity.
That's true.
So, you know, these nuns that, you know, they're there, maybe they could have fun with each other once in a while, I hope so. But they were not seeing, I guess, they were not seeing so many naked men or even naked women, because I think in medieval times people didn't take as much showers.
No.
They didn't see each other naked so much. So it's like, yeah, you're gonna be in hell, but it feels so nice to draw these people naked, you know. So I guess that there's that side to it as well. I find it funny. I also find it very funny that, imagine you're a nun and you pray every day to a naked guy on a cross.
Yeah. I mean, there's
that's another form of torture, isn't it?
Yeah. And there definitely are some of these sort of like paintings and sculptures of nuns in religious ecstasy. You know, it certainly looks a lot like a different kind of ecstasy, to be sure. And I'm not talking about...
that you're referring to the famous Saint Teresa, or...
Yes,
right?
Yes, to be sure.
Yeah, the Baroque sculpture.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's right. They knew it was good.
Yeah.
They were having as much fun as they could.
Let's hope so. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. It's also interesting how there is all this nudity, but with every single figure is sort of carefully posed so that there is no sort of, you know, full frontal crotch action going on. Right? They're all sort of in a profile, and even in the cases where you feel like you might. There is a chance you might, with this pose, you know, catch sight of some demon, you know, appendages. There's a carefully placed flame there that just sort of covers that up. So, but at the same time, one thing I do wonder is, and this is, of course, this painting is not exactly a masterclass in human anatomy, but I do wonder if any of these figures are supposed to be women. There are some figures in the second sort of tier from the top. There are some figures that do look like they're in something similar to a dress, but the vast majority of figures definitely, to me, look like men, which also is an interesting aspect to consider if this is a book for nuns. Is this sort of you know, hell in their conception, are the sinners men? Is this sort of them sort of drawing out their little revenge on mankind? I mean, these are women that, swore off men, right? So I wonder if there might be some, some significance to that as well. That this is these demons look very male to me. I don't know. Of course, I'm not sure about demons. They might not have genders at all, but still, it is
so
a universe.
You are saying that the demons are a metaphor for the patriarchy?
I mean, no, I wasn't saying that exactly, but do explain that theory to me, because that sounds intriguing.
No, I mean, the patriarchy as a society dominated by men.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
So if you're saying that all the demons seem like men, and if it's, everyone is being tortured by men, this is basically the nuns saying that the root of evil is men.
It could be. Except for the part where I kind of feel like it looks like most of the people they're torturing are men as well. So, it could also be the nuns are saying that, the sinners of this world are the men, which, certainly sometimes, yeah. I mean, it could be that. It's interesting to think that. It could be like the medieval sort of equivalent to the Scum Manifesto or something like that. Just like an image for ladies to enjoy men getting their righteous comeuppance for their wicked ways. Who knows?
Yeah. A little bit of the Simone Beauvoir of the medieval times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Also, there's something else that I think we have to take in consideration. I might be wrong or right, but if these are nuns, and I'm assuming a lot of these nuns were maybe, very, very young girls that might have never seen a naked man in their whole life. Right. So the fact that they're not showing male genitals at all, it might be because they didn't know how actually it looked like. So
yeah, that is very possible, to be sure.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure that it's most likely that it's because for religious reasons, but why not one going together with the other,
Yeah, both might certainly be true.
Yeah. And also the other thing that we were talking about, realism and all of that, is that even though this is so old, but the fact that it's not as realistic, the fact that it's more stylized, I think it makes it look way more contemporary, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because it looks like, you mentioned comics, and it looks like a layout of a comic or the layout of a picture book or something like that. The little divisions of hell could be like panels from a comic book and stuff like that.
Certainly.
So I find, and also the layouts of the other pages are very, very interesting.
Yes, to be sure.
So there's one page actually, it says Christ as a tree, Hortus Deliciarum.
Yeah.
That it seems that the tree seems like ovaries, seems a little bit like ovaries, and like the guy in the bottom seems like the open to a vagina. Have you thought about it?
I have not, but now I can't think of anything else. I can't see anything else. Yeah.
So I really think this was a feminist manifesto from medieval times.
Yeah,
anyway.
And I think it is one of those. I mean, I think there are a lot of examples of how, men have mostly been writing the history books, and most of what's been kept from olden times was documentation done by men. And so I think has surely. I mean, we're exaggerating a little bit here, right? But But I'm sure there have been cultures dominated by women, like these local subcultures, where, I mean, why would they not have had their very much their own perception and sense of the relationship between the genders, and their own pride in their femininity, and why would they not have expressed that in different ways, right? I think that makes perfect sense. I think we sometimes tend to look back at very early times and just sort of and think of them as not having as sophisticated a sense of their own identity and the systems they live under, etc., as we do now. But I mean, the human brain has been the same for thousands of years, right? They were no dumber than us. They were perhaps, definitely less informed in a lot of ways. They had less information available to them, but they were not in any way incapable of independent thought and of forming their very own, very specific ideas about, men and women and society, So that is, but like the thing you say about this feeling contemporary, that was kind of part of why I wanted to pick a picture like this, because if you look sort of very big picture at the history of art, there was, you have this kind of stuff, and then you have a long period of time where images, where fine arts is very married to the idea of realism or some kind of verisimilitude, of being able to produce images that look as real as possible. We talked about Caravaggio at some point, and he was somebody who everybody praised for the way his religious pictures just felt like you were there, and they were so immediate. And that kind of sort of sensory experience was something that fine arts pursued in a quite a rigorous way for quite a long time. And then you do have the end of the 19th century and especially the beginning of the 20th century. You have this liberation from the commitment to realism, and then you get kind of, in a way, you circle back to a type of art that, again, is about communicating. It is about storytelling. It is about, conveying ideas more than, look at this, beautiful thing or this sort of magnificent thing or something like that, right? So there is kind of a circling back in a way, and I think that's why this feels so contemporary.
Yeah, and also also because with Cubism and other modernist movements, you go back to flat images.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's it. This is flat. This is a picture that is worried, that takes the paper or whatever this was depicted on as a flat surface instead of pretending that it's 3D, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
instead of creating an illusion.
Yeah.
And Cubism is about that. It's about breaking the planes and making it flat at the same time that it breaks perspective and all of that. And Picasso and also the other Cubists and also the other modernist movements were also influenced by art that was coming, from Africa and the old civilizations, yes. Like pre-Columbian art as well, and I think usually it's not mentioned so much that Cubism was inspired by medieval art, but I think it also I feel that there are some visual connections there, and usually they say that Picasso was mostly inspired by African art, but I think and the Cubists as well, but I believe that they were artists, they were aware of other types of art, so I think probably the Egyptians work, the medieval art and all of that, it probably influenced them also a little bit, and in ways that were maybe not as directly, but I'm sure they picked different elements from different places to create their thing. That's how creation work.
To be sure.
So,
and I think no matter what they were looking at, I think that for me it's I think you could definitely make the argument that, a piece like the one we're looking at today and a cubist painting, it sort of comes from the same impulse of like, why do I have to be tied to how something looks in perfect perspective? If I want to show all the sides of this table at once, I can do that. If I feel like that is the information I want to convey, and there is room for that on this picture plane, I can just put it there and arrange it, to communicate that to whoever is looking. And I don't have to be tied to this task of producing an illusion of life, right, or an illusion of reality. And I think that's what they sort of have in common. They look at the picture plane and they go, how can I, within this, within the frames of this, how can I communicate all the information I want? How can I fit it all in there, rather than what do things actually look like in perfect perspective.
It was about, definitely, it was about conveying ideas.
Yeah. And I think this medieval art and pre-Columbian art, and I think they share that same attitude towards pictures. And I think if you look at the big picture of things, I think the history of Western art, and this sort of realist art, I think that's kind of the aberration, rather than the kind of picture logic we're seeing in an image like this. I think this is probably in some ways a more natural, and I'm using this in scare quotes, but I think it's a more intuitive way to use and make images for human beings than than a beautiful landscape, a perfectly in perspective landscape painting or something like that, right?
Yeah, if you look, for example, at the paintings on the caves, right? The Paleolithic. Was it from the Paleolithic? I don't know. The paintings from the cavemen, so to speak.
The caves of Lascaux.
They looked more like this than with the stuff from Renaissance or from the Romans and all of that.
Absolutely, to be sure.
What I like about modernism and also about post-modernism, more even postmodernism, is that it looks at all of this. It looks at flat art and more three-dimensional art and all of that, and it says, you know what? You just do whatever. You just do whatever you want. Be creative, and I think postmodernism puts the focus on creativity and not so much on movements or on a canon, on a standard, on something that you have to follow. Because the modernists, if you were a cubist, you would do like this. If you were a Dadaist, you would do like that. If you were a surrealist, you would do like that. The same time in Renaissance, there was, this way of representing. And I think, fortunately, now we are freed from those chains of like, you have to do it in this way, otherwise you are bad.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, because I think it's important to remember about the modernist movements that they were trying to replace this sort of logic of, the painting has to look exactly how things look in real life. They were trying to replace that with something else, but a lot of them were very dogmatic about what that other thing should be.
Dogmatic, that was the word that I was missing.
Exactly. So they wrote manifestos about, no, the only right way to make art is this, or it's that, right?
Exactly.
And so they were kind of, in a way, they were replacing the old dogma with new dogma.
Exactly.
Where, yes, I agree with you. I think it's more interesting to get rid of dogma altogether, but of course, I don't know, but I'm sure that the times in which this lovely drawing of hell was made had its own dogma and its own very specific ideas about how to pictorially, create something, how to depict some things, etc. So there's probably always been dogma, but it is definitely interesting, I think, to sort of, as much as you can liberate yourself from that and come up with your own ideas about how to communicate through pictures.
Yeah, the thing with those dogmas though is that those dogmas create a standard of quality that you can everyone who knows kind of those dogmas, who knows how to evaluate quality, can say this is good, this is bad, right?
Right.
And nowadays you can no longer evaluate that. It's more subjective.
Of course. Which presents its own
side.
It presents its own problems, like where you get a lot of people going, my 5-year-old could have created that, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I think the dogmas, to be sure, like the dogma of realism certainly had a value to artists in that they could sort of show to people this beautiful landscape painting they did, and people could see, my 5-year-old daughter could certainly not do that. You are somebody who has training that sets you apart. You are worth me spending money on your stuff, right? And I think that's always been part of the job of being an artist, is convincing people that what you bring is unique and has value, because of course artists are always at the risk of people feeling like I should probably just get a nice meal at a restaurant instead of buying this picture. So but anyway,
yeah, I think it's always a matter of like, if people like it, it's, if there's somebody somewhere that enjoys it, then great.
Mm-hmm.
And if that person is only you, then you decide, do I want to keep doing this, or should I try to fit somebody's standards, somebody's dogma of what is good and what is art or not art. For example, you were mentioning in the beginning that now there's a lot of memes based on these medieval paintings.
Yeah.
And in my mind pops a lot of the times the question, is a meme a work of art, or what is it? Is it like a piece of arts and crafts? What is it?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have copyrights, or it doesn't have like an author. There's nobody, most of the time there's nobody really claiming to be the author. This kind of thing, and it's creative, and it's as creative as conceptual art, right? Because what matters the most is the concept, not so much the execution.
To be sure.
So is a meme art? Is a meme not art? And I think it doesn't matter, if a person finds it enjoyable, if a person thinks it's art, it's fine. If they don't think it's art, and if they don't find it enjoyable, or they find it enjoyable but they don't think it's art, postmodernism, who cares?
Who cares?
That's the thing.
Though it is very interesting to think about how will we evaluate memes of today. How will they be remembered, possibly documented, possibly valued in like 50 years, something like that, that's really interesting for me to think about. And I guess
have you read about the new, what do they call NFTs? Non-fungible, what is it? Non-fungible trading something? Non-fungible objects? Non-fungible something.
Yeah.
It's the stuff. Have you heard about it?
I have heard about it. I think, should I just stop the recording and then we can just end it wherever? Because I feel like we're getting way off topic probably.
No.
We can also just keep going. We can keep going.
Yeah, we can keep going. Then we could. Anyway, Eric.
Yes.
Because I have a point. I
I'm not. Don't doubt that you have a point. No.
Because the thing is that, with that kind of work being sold online, that it's just digital work.
Mm-hmm.
There are people buying memes.
Yeah.
Or something that looks like memes. So people are out there.
Yeah. It's really.
That was just my point, Eric. That was just my point.
I know. But we're kind of getting to the point where it's hard to tie it back into this painting, isn't it?
Yeah, so I guess this is the end.
I think it's the
The
end.
only end. The end.
I think we should let people get on with their lives now and end this conversation.
Let's do that.
But yeah, thank you very much for this, Mao, and talk to you later.
Thank you, Eric.